Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ninth episode of Disability Discrimination Ban starting now. I am your host, Lindsay, and last week you heard from a Beacon professor, Mark Roberts, who you heard me say to him, I gave him a hard time about a speech that he made me do. And you also heard that I was going to have a second one on. Well, this one too decided to give me a 12-page paper that I needed to write. But I won't give her too much of a hard time because I got to learn about a different country. Dr. AJ Marsden, welcome to the show, Dr. Marsden.
Well, thank you for having me, Lindsay. I really appreciate being here. This is going to be fun.
Yes, a lot of fun. So, can you tell the listeners a little bit about you and how you came to be a professor at Beacon?
Absolutely, yes. Well, I was born and raised in Wisconsin. So I'm from a very cold area of the United States. I wanted to get out of Wisconsin as early as possible, so I joined the military. I was a nurse in the military for a while, almost 10 years. And then I decided I didn't want to do that full time for the rest of my life because nursing is challenging in a lot of different ways. So I went back to school. I got my bachelor's in psychology, and then I got my master's, and then I got my PhD. While I was in grad school, one of the things that we had to do in my program was we had to teach a class, right? So when we were in the third year of our PhD program, one of the ways that we earned money, we earned our stipend, was by teaching an organizational behavior class. And, initially I didn't want to go into teaching. I wanted to work for a big organization, make a bunch of money, and just work at like Anheuser-Busch or Purina and just make a bunch of money doing data and statistics and stuff. But then I was forced to teach this class, and I really, really loved teaching. I really enjoyed it. I liked talking with the students. I liked learning their perspectives. I enjoyed making assignments, to be honest. I liked all that stuff. So that's when I kind of changed my mind and said, you know what, maybe I should go into academia. So I taught for a couple years at a school in St. Louis called Lindenwood University. I actually still moonlight there. I still teach a couple online classes there. It's a great school and I really liked it, but it's a very big school. So, and I noticed that a lot of my students that had struggles and had disabilities were falling through the cracks, right? Like they weren't getting the help that they needed. And I felt really bad for those students, but at the same time, I felt very overwhelmed because a lot of my classes had like 50 or 60 students in them. So I could never build those like one-on-one relationships with my students. So I started looking for another job, and that's when I found Beacon College. And I was like, oh my God, here is a college that has small classes so I can get to know my students. And I know for sure that the students that are struggling are getting the help that they need here, right? So that was what attracted me to Beacon, and that's how I ended up there.
Yeah. One thing me and Sam said, and me and Mark also said, is Beacon's really a family atmosphere. One of the hardest things that I had graduating was like I created more than a school professor relationship by the time I was graduating. Like, no, I don't want to leave all my professors. But
it's a bittersweet moment, right?
yeah. But of course we stay in touch often. So
Yes,
that's
that's
good.
exciting.
So there's a lot of favorite things about Beacon, but what is your top favorite and how long have you worked there?
I have been at Beacon for almost 10 years. So I know, right? I started in 2014. So it's almost 10 years. I know that it doesn't feel like it's been that long, which is probably great, right? That's a good thing. It doesn't feel like I've worked there that long. Time has flown by. Probably my favorite thing about teaching there is the students, getting to know the students, getting to know your guys' background, your history, what brought you to Beacon. And then more importantly, watching you grow throughout the 4 years, right? So that's my favorite thing, is just watching you guys come in as scared freshmen who a lot of times have had a really not so happy educational past, right? And then you come into Beacon and you're scared and you're nervous. And then slowly over those 4 years, you make friends, you start to open up, you start feeling more confident. And then I get to see you grow into like this really awesome young adult. So it's a really fun process.
Oh, well, I loved seeing my own classmates excel, because it's not just the professor that sees it, it's their student,
I
it's their
hope you guys do.
classmates or your students.
Yes, yes.
But one sec. So at Beacon, you see many type of disabilities. Some you have heard of, some you have heard of but not seen, or some you haven't seen at all.
Right.
Uh, what have you learned anything from your students?
Absolutely. I learn from them every day, every semester, right? I get to learn something, not just about their disabilities, but like how they cope with things, how they've dealt with things. So I get to learn different coping mechanisms, sometimes things that don't work for one student, another student it'll work great for. So getting to learn like kind of their workarounds, getting to learn how their brain works. It's really forced me to be more kind of open-minded, right, about how people learn. So I learn really well in the traditional, just lecture at me and I'll absorb it. So,
I'm
right.
that
And
way.
not everybody is like that. So it's really forced me to take on a different perspective and be like, okay, not everybody learns that way. Let's find other ways that we can pass on this information, pass on this knowledge, and make it fun. So it's been challenging, but at the same time, it's been a really good challenge.
Well, I think your teaching style is very good.
Thanks,
Uh,
Lindsay.
I skipped over a question. So you said you really loved creating assignments.
I do.
And so how do you really come up with the assignments and for the students to do? But because it's a college with a disability, how do you make it easier for them to understand? This is
Right.
one of the questions that got Mark yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is hard. This is hard because I hear a lot of people like hesitation with some students' families being like, "Oh, I don't want to send my son or daughter there because you're going to make it easy. You're going to make it too easy for them, right?" And that's not how we change things in the classroom, right? We don't make the assignments easier so then that way you can complete them. The assignments, because we're accredited, right? We have an organization that comes in and checks to make sure that we're doing everything to the same standard that UCF is, or that North Florida is, that all the other schools are in the South. We're held to that same standard. So I need to make sure that the assignments that I give you would be completely acceptable assignments at UCF, right? So they have to be that same quality, that same level. So I don't necessarily make it easier, but what I do instead is I make the process of the assignment different and easier. I break it down. So you mentioned at the start of this podcast, Lindsay, that 12-page paper, right?
If
Now,
you talk to any of my classmates in my cross-cultural class, then they'll tell you that that paper was a pain in the butt.
yes, yes. And that paper, it's kind of scary, but that's a 3,000 level class. And at any other university,
but that's your favorite assignment. So
Yes, yes, it is. So first, you have to make it engaging, right? So that's why I allow for as much choice in the assignment as possible. So you could choose the person that you interviewed, you could choose the country that you wanted to focus on, right? So you could even, to a certain extent, choose the interview questions that you wanted to have. There were certain topics that you had to cover, but you could come up with your own interview questions. So even though it was a big assignment, I didn't just throw it at you and say, okay, here's a paper, it's due on this date, go do it, right? Which is honestly what would happen at UCF or what I do at Lindenwood. I just give the assignment and I'm like, okay, go work on it. Now, students with disabilities, we know that they don't have the best time management skills, and sometimes they don't have the best executive functioning skills. So, getting started on a big project like that is scary and it's very intimidating. So, what I try to do is I break it down, right? So, the very first thing that you guys had to do was identify who you wanted to interview, right? So, taking that first step, find somebody that you want to interview, step one. And then from there, just breaking it down into more steps. Okay, now we're going to come up with interview questions. Give me 10 to 12 interview questions. So you have that ready. Next, you had to set a date. So by breaking up a big assignment like that in little steps, that's how we can make it better for students with disabilities, right? Because we help them through the process one little step at a time.
yeah, that process actually really helped me. And if anyone listening has never heard of a cross-cultural psychology class, and you can kind of chime in on what it focuses on, but it's basically where you look at different cultures like the UK, the Ireland, Australia. And
Yes.
I will say that that was my favorite class at Beacon.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Uh Part of the reason too is you didn't just teach it, you had your international friends
Yes.
come on, and
Yes.
like your friend from the UK, we still talk about all
Good. That's good. I'm so glad to hear that. But that's one thing that I try to do with my assignments or with all my classes is, right, we have, especially here in Florida, we have all these resources around us, right? We have all of these things that we could tap into to help teach a topic. So in cross cultural, I tried to tap into, my international friend network and get them to come in and share with them their experiences because they do a much better job of explaining their culture than I do, right? They live in it.
Yeah.
So, and I also try, and unfortunately, we didn't get to do it with your guys' class because of COVID, but I also like trying to incorporate field trips to like Epcot for that class.
I, I
Things like
I think you having your friends come on probably makes up for not going. Uh,
that's good.
and
That's good.
I think everyone in that class can agree. Um,
Here.
but so there could be a parent or a prospective student listening about learning about Beacon, because Sam and I got into to what Beacon is as a college. I asked Mark this question. What would you say to them about attending Beacon?
What I would ask them like what kind of brought them to this decision, right? Why were they attracted to Beacon in the first place? And then depending on what they said there, I might tailor my response. But if they're coming to Beacon because they have the accommodations and the resources that they want for their son or daughter, then 100% absolutely. If they're going to send their son or daughter to Beacon because they're not really sure if they should be in college, I might say just hold off and wait a year, right? Before you send them to college. They might not be ready. And unfortunately, that is a small part of our population. And Lindsay, I'm sure you've seen it, students who come to college who just are not quite ready to be there yet, right? They're not
Who can't handle the
the freedom.
level that you guys put us put us through.
Right, exactly, and then they end up failing out, and then that's a feeling of failure, and, that's not a good thing, and if they would have maybe just waited 1 year or maybe took, like, the Navigator prep class or something like that, they would feel more prepared for college when they came later. So, I would definitely wanna talk about feeling prepared for college. How prepared do they feel? Are they ready to live on their own or with a roommate, right? Because that's a big change, that's a big challenge. So I would want to know a little bit more about, what they're trying to get out of their college experience.
And one thing Mark did bring up that's actually a very good idea is if there's a family that's interested, why doesn't Beacon allow them to sit in on one of the classes
Yes.
so
Yeah.
they can see, okay, there's 12 students to a class, if not two more. And
Right.
by that, I would say by the end of their time at Beacon, the professors and the staff will be family instead of just call college professors and staff
Yeah,
members.
I mean, we invest a lot of our time, and we want to see you guys succeed. So we get to know you as people, as individuals. And that I think that's one key difference with Beacon professors is that we take the time to get to know you. We really invest part of ourselves in you. So we get excited when you guys succeed and we get sad when you guys fail. So
Yeah. Well, I was not a straight A student at times, but
you
I
always
got
got your work done,
straight
Lindsay.
A's.
You always did a
I also
quality job.
do, as long as you ask questions and get your homework done on time,
Yes.
then then you'll excel in the class. Like there was a few where it was actually a Dr. Nance class where
Uh,
she emailed me like, you have so many points, you don't need to do any more assignments. There was one I still did, but
You should have her come on here too.
I'm I'm gonna contact her at some point. I was just wanting to get a few guests on first,
Yeah,
so everyone else can think and or listen and they can know, okay, this is how she's gonna interview us.
yeah. Yes. Give a little realistic preview.
Yeah, and so what do you think the world can learn from students at Beacon or people with disabilities in general?
I like this question, Lindsay. I like that. When I saw this, I was really happy to see this on the list because, you asked earlier, what can I learn? I think it's the same thing everybody can learn, right? Just approach the situations with an open heart and an open mind. Try to learn from other people. Don't assume that you know. That's something that's really hard for people to do, right? Is they just assume, well, oh, my son or daughter has this disability, or I know of somebody who has this disability, so I know all about it. But you know that just because one person has this disability doesn't mean that they're going to present it or they're going to have characteristics that are exactly the same as somebody else. Everybody's different, right? Everybody's unique. So I think that that's one thing that we should keep in mind, and we should learn from students at Beacon and those in the disability community is that everybody's unique, everybody has their own struggles, and we just need to be empathetic and compassionate and listen to one another. So I think that's really important.
So when I was researching starting this podcast, the one thing I did was research to see if anyone else was doing something about discrimination against people with disabilities. And I found, I think, at least two, but they hadn't posted an episode in like a very long time. And
It's
I was
unfortunate.
like, okay, this will be a thing that I think if I can or you can uh kind of explain everything to the listeners, then maybe they'll start understanding, okay, just because Lindsay has a disability doesn't mean she's a crazy person.
Right. Yes.
She's
Yes.
Because we're labeled like one of the things, I have cerebral palsy, which
Mm.
is paralysis in one side. So if anyone thinks I'm a psychotic for having a cerebral palsy,
It's not a fair assumption at all.
not. But why do you think that this topic is rarely talked about? And why do you think it's important to have this kind of conversation?
I think it's important because unfortunately there's still a lot of shame around disabilities, right? People who look at those with disabilities oftentimes look at them with pity, right? As like, oh, well, poor you, woe is you. It must really suck, right, to have that kind of life. And because of that, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to learn about it. They don't want to know anything about it because they just automatically assume it's going to suck. It's got to be awful. But that's not always the case. I mean, you know that. That's not the case at all. So I think some people are quiet about disabilities just because they themselves are ashamed of the topic and they don't want to talk about it. But there's also an assumption that people with disabilities are being taken care of, right? We passed the Americans with Disability Act and everything's fine. There's no reason to be concerned about people with disabilities. And again, that's ignorance, right? Because they don't realize that, yes, that law exists and that law is great and it's helpful in a lot of ways, but it's not solving all of the problems that people with disabilities face. So there's still stigma, there's still a lot of negative labeling of people, like you said, saying that people are crazy, and then now assuming that everybody with disabilities also has terrible mental health issues and we shouldn't give anybody guns, right? So there's that whole side of it as well. And so people don't want to talk about it because they're not sure how to talk about it, or they don't want to talk about it because they think it's not an issue. And both of those is ignorance, right? Both of those is just not wanting to talk about it. So it's
And
unfortunate.
when I interviewed Mark, I uh we had talked about that people with disabilities can excel or
Yes.
limitations.
Yes.
I gave the same example with when I interviewed him, but I wanted to tell you the story. So when I was, I think, a senior in high school, I did some sort of test. I don't remember what it was, but the lady that administered it basically said to my parents, um, yeah, she's not smart enough to go to college, so the best you can do uh is work at Waterburger, for example, for minimum wage. And if this lady listens to Mark's and yours episodes, what you don't realize is I went to college. I graduated magna cum laude with a 3.66 uh GPA with a bachelor's in science. I think that's the so
Yes.
lady, do you really think that I wasn't smart enough
Right.
to do it? Because there's a lot of people that think, oh, you're not smart enough to do anything. And
Right.
that's where I'm really thankful for Beacon, because they gave me, or you guys gave me the ability to prove to my doubters that they were wrong about what they were saying. And
Yes.
now if I knew where the lady was, I would put my diploma in her face.
Good. Yes.
Really?
Right. Yes. I mean, this, it just goes to show when you have the proper supports in place, right? When you create a community that truly cares about its students and wants to see them succeed, then they'll succeed. Now, granted, I mean, we always have a couple students still that fail and don't get their degree, and that happens. But in general, when you come and you talk to us and you explain what you need and it's reasonable, we're there. We're there to help.
Yeah. So, have these questions been hard for you?
Some of them are, yeah, they're challenging me to think about things differently, which is really good, Lindsay.
So, as you mentioned earlier, there are some people that don't view uh students or adults with limitations, because I'm not the biggest fan of the word disability, because yes, we have a disability, but that doesn't stop from us from doing what you're doing. We just need to do it in a different way for us to understand and
Exactly.
for us to be comfortable doing it.
Right.
What would you say to someone that doesn't consider me as equal to them?
I would wanna know why they think that way. I really just don't understand why anybody would think that way. Why would you think that you were better than anybody else? Not just somebody that had a physical or mental disability, it just like, why would you think you were better than anybody else, right? So we're all human beings, we all have feelings. When you say something mean, it hurts everybody, right? So saying that you're better than somebody else because you don't have that limitation, that's just a shitty person, I'm sorry to curse. That's
Oh,
just a bad person. So I would wanna know why. What's your rationale? Why do you feel that way? And then from there, you can just kind of tear them apart, right?
yeah. It's crazy, like I just mentioned the story about that person doubting me. It's like you don't people don't even know the full story
Right,
of
exactly.
what, because I've opened up to you about my, like, the full extent of my disability.
Right.
But the listeners who are not my parents' friends or my friends don't know what I went through the first, I think I was 20, 21 or 20 when I entered college.
Mhm.
Um, they don't know what happened in those 20 years before I met anyone at Beacon.
Right.
And so the last question, this is I think a nice one because everyone has liked it. Um, so in recent years, we have seen the question, what would you say to your younger self?
I
So,
think this is a
Dr. Marsden, what would you say to your younger self?
I think this is a good question. There's a lot of things that I would want to say, just because I mean, we should always look back on our younger self and kind of cringe a little bit, right? Be like, oh man, I'm glad that I'm growing. I'm glad I'm not the same person that I was when I was younger. We should always try to be better. I hope 10 years from now I look back on my 40s and say, oh, I could have done that better, right? But
Wait,
anyway,
you're in
yeah,
your
I'm
40s?
in my 40s. I know. So,
You
I
don't
know.
look like.
Oh, thank you, Lindsay. As I got my birthday coming up next week, so it's on my mind. But anyway, so this is a really well-timed question, Lindsay. So I would tell myself first, enjoy where you are. There was a lot of rushing when I was younger. When I was your age, I was like, I wanted to get done with school and then I wanted to get my master's and I want to get my PhD. Like I wasn't enjoying the process, right? So I would tell my younger self, just slow down, enjoy the process. And then the other thing that I would tell my younger self is not to be such a dick sometimes because man, would I say things that were mean and unnecessary. And sometimes I'd say them for shock value because I was young. So I would say, chill out with that. Don't be so mean. Be nicer.
Yeah, and one thing, I'm not sure if Beacon has these type of events, but what would be fun to do is for those people in Lake County where Leesburg is, if they have questions, that Beacon has some type of forum where, like, former students, employees,
Yeah.
faculty will just answer their questions.
That would be nice. Almost like a web page of some sort, right? Where we could interact.
Because I believe discrimination is still going on because no one understands
Yes.
disabilities
Yes. I
or
agree.
limitations. And limitations is such uh a broad topic that
Right.
it's probably going to take the rest of my life of doing this podcast to fully help someone understand
But that's good.
we're in
Right?
this we're in the same world. Don't
Yeah.
treat me differently.
Yes. I agree. I agree. So I think we're making progress, right? A little bit at a time, but lately it does feel like whenever we make progress, suddenly we're two steps back, right? A little progress forward, two steps back. So the past, I think, 4 or 5 years have just been rough.
It's Yeah, I just ever since I've started this podcast, I am gonna ask you a question when this episode's over with. But I did look up like if the UK has any laws compared to the ADA, and I forgot the name of it, but they do. I just need a British person to kind of explain the terminology because our terminology with compared to the UK is totally different. Like I'll read something like I don't understand that.
Well, we'll have to take a look at it.
Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Of course, Lindsay, this was fun. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Well, guys, I will see you the next episode. Bye. There.